Foreign Policy, 19th of October 2022, China is in the sights of Afghan militants. China dream under Chinese President Xi Jinping is actually China's daydream of imperialism, according to a new piece from the Islamic State-Khorasan, the terrorist group's branch in Afghanistan. China hasn't been a significant target for Islamist groups in the past, but that might be about to change. A September 2 piece in the English-language Voice of Khorasan from the Islamic State-Khorasan criticized China's efforts to grow its economy around the world and its treatment of Uyghurs poorly. The story came out soon after the UN report on August 31 that showed how China is mistreating Uyghur and other Muslim minorities in Xinjiang. After not talking about China for a while, the Islamic State has started talking about war again in a big way. The Islamic State's harsh words against China's growing economic power in the Middle East and Central Asia have taken a new turn with this attack on the Chinese Empire. In 2014, the Islamic State spoke out against China's Uyghur policy. In 2015, they ordered the deaths of Chinese prisoners in Pakistan. And in 2017, they made direct threats against the Chinese government. The Islamic State hasn't said much about the plight of the Uyghurs since then. They have also stopped using their messaging and media to call for attacks on Chinese interests. The story about Islamic State-Khorasan shows that people are paying more attention to what China does with Islamist groups, not just from a religious point of view but also for political and economic reasons. Notably, the piece uses the word imperialism to describe China's efforts to take over more of the world. This changes the focus of its criticism from just Muslims being persecuted to saying that China, like other former superpowers like the US, Russia, and Britain, wants to rule the whole world. Similar to other stories around the world about how dangerous China is, the Islamic State-Khorasan offers a radical view of how China's economic growth has become too imperialistic. The article compares Xi's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, to modern imperial expansion, saying that it is similar to the part the British East India Company played in colonizing the West in the past. Some of what Indians say about the controversial China-Pakistan economic corridor is similar to how they talk about the Chinese Empire and Western colonialism in Central and South Asia in the past. People see China's growing economy through the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, as a danger to the West's global dominance. This is in addition to Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the possible conflict between the US and China over Taiwan. The Islamic State-Khorasan sees the chaos that comes with moving from a unipolar to a bipolar world order as a chance to set up the Islamic State's global empire. The piece says that Chinese imperialism is weaker than Western colonialism in the past. It says that US-China global competition and unspecified regional rivalry still stop China from becoming the world's most powerful country. But the article shows how weak China's soft power is by saying that barbaric Chinese infidels don't have an enriched history in terms of literacy and culture, and hardly seems to be possessing the linguistic advantage for global domination when compared to the Wild West. In terms of theological knowledge of geopolitics, the piece says that atheist China's materialistic and mercantile imperialism can't keep growing and dominating the world like the short-lived Mongol Empire. The Silk Road project started by the Mongols in the 13th century is linked to China's Belt and Road Initiative in the 21st century, which spans the Eurasian continent. The power of the Chinese thugs will fail in the same way that the Mongols did, the story says. But what might worry Beijing the most is not the past parallels but the call for new strategies in the present. The piece also talks about how to attack China's BRI projects worldwide, worth trillions of dollars. The fact that Chinese businesses in Mozambique had to close because they were afraid of attacks by mujahideen is used in the article to remind those red atheists whose hands are soaked with the blood of innocent Uyghur Muslims, which is a direct threat to China's economic growth in the developing world. It looks like the Islamic State's threats against China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, especially Chinese projects in Pakistan, are not just empty words. 2 Chinese residents were captured and killed by the Islamic State in Balochistan, a province in the southwestern part of Pakistan, in 2017. Beijing has promised $57 billion for projects that will connect the areas. The article focuses on China's military power in other countries and says that Chinese imperialism is different from Western imperialism, which relies on remote-controlled technology and remote-controlled militia, like the Taliban, whom the Islamic State-Khorasan sees as a Western-backed enemy. Instead, Chinese imperialism relies on economic and financial power. The story says that cowardly Chinese infidels will not be able to defend themselves against the sharp knives of the Khalifa soldiers. This language is similar to how China describes Muslim terrorists who carry knives. The piece seems to think about how China might react to terrorist attacks or threats. But it says, those Maoist cowards haven't learned how to control war from afar like the West did, and they never will. This article says that China's only option is to spend money and remotely set up four-footed cattle like the Taliban Murtadin, which means apostates. This seems to be a reference to Beijing's financial support for the Taliban rather than military backing. The Islamic State-Khorasan's claim of Chinese funding is likely related to recent deals between the Taliban and China, like the building of the Sino-Afghan industrial estate on the outskirts of Kabul, the start of talks on the Messina copper mine, or the supposed oil deal signed with Chinese companies. Concerning China, the conflict between the Taliban, the Islamic State, and Khorasan is mainly about two different but connected issues: Chinese investment in Afghanistan and the Uyghur people who live there. The fact that China hasn't invested in Afghanistan and the Taliban are said to have refused to hand over the Uyghurs to Beijing shows how these problems are connected and essential to China, the Taliban, and the Islamic State Khorasan. Each side has to consider the risks of interactions with the other side. The article's talk of tensions between the US and China and a possible conflict in the Asia-Pacific shows how important major power relations are to the group's strategic thinking. For example, it shows how the terrorist group could attack Chinese interests in Central and South Asia as well as Africa. The piece asks, do the cowardly Chinese atheists have the guts to fight both the West and the Islamic State at the same time? As the international strategic situation changes, the Islamic State Khorasan has changed its story and strategy to focus more on China, accusing it of both repressing Muslim communities and supporting Chinese imperialism. It is important to note that Beijing has not directly used military force to react to this threat or previous terrorist attacks against Chinese people in Central and South Asia or Africa. As part of its plan to fight terrorism around the world, China's government has used several bilateral and multilateral anti-terrorism mechanisms with Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Tajikistan, as well as those within the UN, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and other countries in the region to help their counter-terrorism efforts. The Chinese dream seems to be in danger from both Western countries and the Islamic State in Afghanistan and other places.